Dae-jung wiped the grease from his hands and stared at the broken cooling unit. It was the third one this week. Deep Space Station Kepler-9 was supposed to be a modern facility, built by the best engineers in the Galactic Coalition. But modern didn't always mean reliable. He was 34 years old and had spent the last 15 years fixing things that supposedly didn't break. The station floated at the edge of Coalition space, a massive metal ring that housed 12,000 beings from 40 different species. Dae-jung was one of only 30 humans on board. "The replacement part will arrive in 6 days," said his supervisor, a tall alien named Vector. The Colarian had 6 arms and skin that shimmered like oil on water. Dae-jung looked at the unit again. According to the manual, it needed a certified component. According to reality, it needed someone willing to bypass 3 safety protocols and reroute power through a secondary system. "Give me 2 hours," he said. Vector's 4 eyes blinked in sequence. "The manual says." "I know what the manual says." Dae-jung grabbed his toolbox. "But the manual also says this thing shouldn't break every other week." 3 hours later, the cooling unit hummed back to life. Vector examined Dae-jung's work with something between admiration and horror. "This is irregular," the Colarian said slowly, "but functional. How did you know it would work?" "I didn't," Dae-jung admitted, "but doing nothing wasn't going to fix it." That was how most of his days went. Fix something the expensive way, or fix it the fast way. The other engineers on the station preferred the expensive way. It was safer, more predictable, and followed all the proper procedures. His communicator buzzed during his sleep cycle. He groaned and checked the message. Captain Leas wanted to see him immediately. That was never good news. The captain's office was at the top of the station's central hub. Leas was a Threxian, a species that lived for centuries and had skin like colored glass. She was 300 years old and had seen more of the galaxy than Dae-jung could imagine. "We have a situation," Leas said without greeting. Her crystalline face reflected the light from a dozen different angles. "A cargo ship arrived this morning. During inspection, we found something unusual in their hold." She pulled up a holographic display. Coordinates floated in the air, along with what looked like an ancient star map. "These coordinates were hidden inside a fuel container," Leas continued, "encrypted with a code that hasn't been used in over 1,000 years. Our computers barely recognized it. Leas continue. Dae-jung studied the map. "What's at these coordinates? We don't know, but the encryption matches Veltaran patterns." That got his attention. The Veltarans were legends. An ancient civilization that vanished 15,000 years ago, leaving behind technology so advanced that even the Coalition couldn't reproduce it. Every species in the galaxy knew the stories. Cities that floated in the clouds. Ships that could cross entire sectors in hours. Weapons that could reshape planets. And then, one day, they were simply gone. "You think it's real?" Dae-jung asked. "The Coalition is sending a research vessel to investigate. The times, Harmonious Dawn times, will depart in 3 days." Leas paused. "They've requested a human engineer for the crew." Leas, "Why me?" "Because you have a reputation for solving problems that others say can't be solved." Leas leaned forward. "And because, if this is truly a Veltaran site, we'll need someone who isn't afraid to try unconventional methods." 2 days later, Dae-jung stood in the docking bay of the Times Harmonious Dawn *. The research vessel was smaller than he expected, built for speed rather than comfort. The crew was equally small, just 12 beings, including him. He met Dr. Hyun-A in the common area. She was a human xenoarchaeologist, probably 10 years younger than him, with sharp eyes that seemed to notice everything. She carried 3 data tablets and looked like she hadn't slept in days. "You're the engineer," she said. It wasn't a question. "Dae-jung, Hyun-A, I've read your file. You have a habit of ignoring safety protocols. Only the unnecessary ones. She almost smiled. Good. We might need that. She pulled up an image on one of her tablets. Do you know what this is? It was a structure. Massive. The image showed something the size of a small moon, covered in geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. That's what we're looking for, Hyunei said. The Archive of Veltara. It's been lost for over a millennium. If the coordinates are correct, we'll reach it in 4 days. And if they're wrong, then I've wasted 5 years of my career chasing a myth. Her expression hardened. I'm betting everything on this being real. The journey took exactly 4 days. Dae-jung spent most of it reading everything he could find about the Veltarans. There wasn't much. They left no bodies, no explanation, no farewell message, just empty cities and silent machines. When they finally dropped out of faster-than-light travel, the entire crew gathered on the bridge. The archive floated in the viewport like a dark moon. It was exactly as the ancient images showed it. A massive sphere covered in patterns that seemed to shift when you weren't looking directly at them. Debris floated around it, the remains of ships that had tried to reach it over the centuries. Scanning now, said one of the officers. The ship's sensors washed over the archive, searching for any sign of life or power. Minutes passed. Nothing, the officer reported. No power readings, no heat signatures, no electromagnetic activity. It's completely dead. Captain Leas commanded the ship to move closer. They circled the archive 3 times, scanning from every angle. The results were the same. Dead, silent, cold. Dr. Hyunei stared at the structure with an expression Dae-jung couldn't read. She'd spent years searching for this place. And now that they'd found it, it was nothing but an ancient tomb. Get me a shuttle, she said quietly. I want to see it up close. They suited up and took a small craft to the archive's surface. Dae-jung went with her, along with Vector and 2 security officers. The surface was covered in dust that had accumulated over thousands of years. Their boots left the first footprints in an age. Hyunei touched the wall with a gloved hand. It's real, she whispered. It's actually real, but real didn't mean functional. They spent hours exploring the surface, finding nothing but sealed doors and dark windows. Every entrance was locked. Every system was silent. When they returned to the ship, Hyunei looked defeated. 6 weeks, Captain Leas said. The Coalition is giving us 6 weeks to find a way inside. After that, they're sending a larger team. Dae-jung understood what that meant. A larger team meant the humans would be sent home. This was Hyunei's one chance to make history. And the clock was already ticking. That night, Dae-jung couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about the archive. Something bothered him, but he couldn't figure out what. Then it hit him. The patterns on the surface weren't just decorative. They were covering something. Seams, hatches, access panels. He'd seen the same thing 100 times on stations across Coalition space. Maintenance access. Hidden under decorative covers. The kind of thing you'd only notice if you'd spent years crawling through service tunnels fixing broken equipment. The Veltarans might have been advanced beyond imagination, but they still built things that needed maintenance. And maintenance meant access panels, which meant there might be a way inside after all. The Coalition's best minds arrived 3 days later. They came in ships that gleamed like jewels, carrying equipment that cost more than some planets. Dae-jung watched them set up their workspace in the Time's Harmonious Dawn ***'s cargo bay, filling it with machines whose purposes he couldn't begin to guess. Dr. Yun was a Kolarian master engineer, famous across the galaxy for designing the quantum gates that connected Coalition space. She had 8 doctoral degrees and had lived for 2 centuries. She looked at the archive data with all 6 of her eyes and declared it fascinating but dormant. The power systems are unlike anything in our current understanding, she explained to the assembled team. The Veltarans used technology that operated on principles we're still trying to comprehend. Beside her stood mathematician Talk, a Netheri who could perceive 11 dimensions. His species didn't have faces as humans understood them, just a constantly shifting surface that reflected his thoughts. The geometric patterns suggest a quantum-locked security system, he said. Breaking it, without the proper codes, could collapse the entire structure. More specialists arrived. Code breakers from the Kravan Empire, who had cracked the Omega protocols during the last war. Energy theorists from the Pelthian Collective, who could detect power sources from 1,000 kilometers away. Each one brought new ideas, new theories, new reasons why activating the archive would be incredibly difficult. Daejung mostly stayed out of their way. He wasn't educated like them. He didn't have degrees or centuries of experience. He just fixed things when they broke. But he watched, and he listened. The specialists spent 2 weeks building computer models of the archive's power systems. They debated whether the Veltarans used zero-point energy or dimensional siphoning. They argued about quantum states and temporal mechanics. Every conversation used words Daejung had to look up later. Dr. Hyune attended every meeting, taking notes furiously. She tried to contribute, but the specialists barely acknowledged her. She was young, by their standards, and human besides. The coalition had only made contact with humanity 30 years ago. In their eyes, humans were still children playing with borrowed toys. They're not even trying, Hyune told Daejung one night in the mess hall. She looked exhausted. They're so focused on understanding how it works that they've forgotten the goal is to make it work. What do the computers say? Daejung asked. That we need more data. Always more data. She pushed her food around her plate. At this rate, we'll be studying the archive for the next decade without ever getting inside. Vector joined them, his 6 arms carrying enough food for 3 people. The latest theory suggests the archive is connected to a centralized power network, he said. When the Veltarans vanished, the network died. Everything connected to it went dark. Has anything Veltaran ever been reactivated? Daejung asked. Once. The lighthouse of Kor, about 1,000 years ago. It lit up for exactly 17 seconds before going dark again. No one knows why it activated or why it stopped. Vector's primary eyes focused on Daejung. Since then, every Veltaran artifact we've found has been completely inert, dead stone and dead metal. The weeks dragged on. The specialists ran simulation after simulation. They built theoretical models of how the archive might have worked. They published papers about their findings, but the archive itself remained dark and silent. Daejung spent his time doing what he always did, walking around and looking at things. While the specialists studied their computer screens, he took shuttles to the archive's surface. He examined the walls, the patterns, the way different sections connected to each other. The other engineers thought he was wasting his time. What could he see that their advanced sensors couldn't detect? What could he understand that their brilliant minds couldn't comprehend? But Daejung wasn't looking for brilliant insights. He was looking for the basics. Where did power come from? Where did it go? How did someone maintain this thing? One day, he noticed something. Beneath the geometric patterns, beneath the cosmic dust that had accumulated over millennia, there were seams, regular, straight lines that suggested panels, the kind of panels that could be opened. He mentioned it to Vector during their next meal. Decorative, the Kolarian said immediately. The Veltarans transcended physical labor 20,000 years ago. Everything was automated, controlled remotely. Those seams are likely artistic, symbolic of their primitive past before they achieved technological enlightenment. But what if they're not? Daejung pressed. What if there's actually a way to access the interior manually? Daejung, to what purpose? The archive requires a synchronized activation sequence across multiple nodes, with quantum-level timing precision. A manual system couldn't possibly achieve that. Vector's tone was patient. The way you'd explain something to a child. I understand you're accustomed to hands-on repair work, but this is different. This is Velteron engineering. It operates on principles far beyond simple mechanical systems. Daejung dropped the subject. But he didn't stop thinking about it. Dr. Hyunei was getting desperate. 5 weeks had passed. The coalition had sent 3 messages already, asking for progress reports. The specialists kept saying they needed more time. But time was running out. They're going to replace us, she told Daejung. They were alone in the observation deck, watching the archive rotate slowly in the viewport. They'll send a bigger team, more prestigious researchers, people who actually matter in academic circles. You matter, Daejung said. I'm a human xenoarchaeologist who spent 5 years chasing a myth. If we don't activate this thing, my career is over. Every other human scholar will point to me as an example of why we shouldn't be taken seriously in academic fields. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass. We should be focusing on mathematics, on military strategy, on things humans are good at, not archaeology, not ancient, alien mysteries. That night, Daejung made a decision. He waited until the sleep cycle, when most of the crew was resting and the specialists were analyzing their latest batch of data. He suited up, grabbed a basic toolkit, and took a shuttle to the archive's surface without telling anyone. The magnetic clamps attached to his boots kept him steady as he walked across the hull. He'd marked the location of the seams on his previous visits. Up close, they were even more obvious. These weren't decorative. These were access panels. He pulled out a pry bar from his toolkit. It was a simple tool, barely changed in design from tools humans had used for centuries. The specialists would have laughed at him for bringing something so primitive to a Velteron structure, but the pry bar fit into the seam perfectly. With effort, the panel shifted. Dust that had been trapped for 1,000 years puffed into space, glittering in the starlight. Daejung wedged the bar deeper and pulled. The panel opened. Inside was a corridor, dark but intact. And on the wall, illuminated by his helmet lamp, was something that made Daejung laugh out loud. A control panel, manual, physical, with actual switches and dials. The Veltarans, for all their advancement, had built their archive with a backup system. A failsafe that didn't require computers or quantum networks or dimensional physics. Just someone willing to flip a switch. His communicator crackled to life. Daejung! It was Hyun-A's voice, sharp with panic. Security detected your shuttle launch. What are you doing? I found something, he said. You need to see this. 20 minutes later, half the crew was crowded around his discovery. Dr. Yan examined the control panel with all 6 of her eyes. Mathematician Talk's surface rippled with what might have been confusion or excitement. Impossible, Dr. Yan whispered. This is a manual override system. For what? Captain Lees asked. If I'm reading these symbols correctly. For initiating a startup sequence. Dr. Yon's voice was uncertain for the first time since she'd arrived. But this contradicts everything we know about Velteron automation protocols. Maybe we don't know everything, Daejung said quietly. The discovery changed everything. The specialists abandoned their simulations and focused on the manual system. They studied the switches, analyzed the symbols, debated what each dial controlled, but they also warned of danger. One wrong input could trigger a cascade failure, Dr. Yan said. We could destroy the entire archive. We should build a simulation first, Mathematician Talk insisted. Model every possible outcome before we attempt anything. How long will that take? Hyun-A asked. 8 months. Perhaps a year. To be certain, Daejung looked at the switches. They were simple, mechanical, built to be used. The Veltarans hadn't made this complicated. Humans had made it complicated by overthinking it, but saying that out loud would mean nothing. He was just a maintenance engineer. What did he know compared to these brilliant minds? Still, he'd found the panel. He'd opened it. and somewhere deep inside, he believed he knew what to do next. The question was whether anyone would let him try. The command deck of the Times' harmonious dawn times felt cramped with so many people inside. Dae-jung stood near the back, while the coalition's experts debated his discovery. For 3 hours, they'd been arguing about what to do with the manual override system. "The risk is unacceptable," said Dr. Yun. Her 6 arms gestured at the holographic display, showing complex energy patterns. "Our simulations indicate that manual activation could create cascade failures across 47 different power nodes. The quantum timing requirements alone, are theoretical," interrupted Dr. Hyune. She'd been quiet most of the meeting, but now she stood up. "Everything we know about Velteron power systems is theoretical. We've never actually activated one, precisely why we must proceed with caution." Mathematician Talk's surface rippled in shades of amber. One mistake could destroy irreplaceable artifacts, possibly the entire station. "We need time to model every variable." Captain Leas tapped her crystalline fingers on the table. The sound was like wind chimes in a storm. "How much time?" 8 months minimum for a basic simulation. Longer if we want to account for unknown factors. "We don't have 8 months," Hyune said. "Coalition High Command has already sent notice. If we don't show progress in the next week, they're reassigning the expedition to a more qualified team." The room fell silent. Everyone knew what that meant. The humans would be removed. Hyune's career would end before it truly began, and Dae-jung would return to fixing cooling units on stations at the edge of space. "There must be a compromise," said Captain Leas. All eyes turned to him. Dae-jung felt his throat go dry. These were some of the most educated beings in the galaxy. What could he possibly say that they hadn't already considered? "I've been tracing the connections," he said slowly. "The manual switches don't connect directly to the main power grid. They connect to what looks like an auxiliary startup system. Like," he searched for the right comparison, "like a hand crank on an old combustion engine. It's not meant to run the whole thing, just to get it started. And this was it antenjagoding to live with heaven air. Like, Dr. Yon's eyes all focused on him. "You traced the connections?" "I followed them. Physically. Inside the access corridors." Dae-jung pulled up images on his datapad. "See here? These conduits run to smaller power cells, not the main reactors. If I'm reading the symbols right, they're designed to wake up the primary systems, not power them." "That's..." Mathematician Talk's surface swirled with colors. "That's actually quite logical. But how did you determine the symbols' meanings? We've been trying to decode Velteron writing for weeks. I didn't decode them. I just looked at the pattern. This symbol appears near every junction we've identified as a power coupling. This one appears near what look like data conduits. It's not language, it's labeling." The room erupted in discussion. Half the specialists started pulling up data to verify his observations. The other half argued that following physical conduits was primitive compared to proper analytical methods. But Dae-jung noticed that Dr. Yun was quiet. She was examining his images carefully, comparing them to the team's existing scans. Finally, she spoke. "He's right. These are startup systems, not primary power." She looked at Dae-jung with something like respect. "How confident are you that you can activate them safely?" 60%, he admitted. "Maybe 70 if I take my time and double-check everything. And if you're wrong?" "If I'm wrong, we're in the same position we're in now, with a dead station and no way inside." Dae-jung met her gaze. "But if I'm right, we wake up the archive. Isn't that worth the risk?" "No," said Mathematician Talk firmly. "We should report this finding to Coalition High Command. Let them decide how to proceed. This is too important to risk on a guess." Hyune stood up again. "With respect, sir, Coalition High Command will form a committee. That committee will debate for months. By the time they make a decision, we'll all be reassigned and someone else will get credit for our work. Credit? Talk's surface flashed red. This isn't about credit. This is about preserving an irreplaceable piece of galactic history, which has been sitting dead for 1,000 years. Hyone's voice rose. At some point, we have to actually do something, instead of just studying it. Enough. Captain Lisa's voice cut through the argument. She looked at Daejung. You said 60% confidence. What would increase that number? Let me spend another day checking the connections. Make sure I understand the sequence correctly. Then, 75%, maybe 80%. And the consequences of failure? Best case, nothing happens. Worst case, we blow some fuses and damage the manual systems. But I don't think we damage the archive itself. These systems are isolated. Lias was quiet for a long moment. 300 years of experience showed in her crystalline face. She'd commanded ships through wars, through first contacts, through disasters that would have destroyed lesser captains. One day, she finally said. You have 1 day to prepare. Then we attempt activation. The room exploded with protests. Dr. Yan argued about proper safety protocols. Mathematician Talk insisted on getting coalition approval first. Others demanded more time for simulations. But Lias raised one hand, and the room fell silent. I've listened to debates for 6 weeks. I've watched simulations run while the archive sits dead. We have 1 week before High Command removes us from this expedition. I'm authorizing 1 attempt under controlled conditions. If it fails, we'll have lost nothing we didn't already lack. She turned to Daejung. 1 day. Use it wisely. The next 24 hours passed in a blur. Daejung spent 16 of them inside the archive's access corridors, double-checking every connection, every junction, every symbol. Hyune followed him with scanning equipment, documenting everything for the official record. Are you scared? She asked during a rest break. Terrified, he admitted. If I'm wrong, I'll be the human who destroyed a priceless archaeological site. They'll probably name a cautionary tale after me. And if you're right, then we wake up something that's been asleep for a millennium. That's terrifying in a different way. He looked at the manual controls. These switches were built to be used. The Veltarans included them for a reason. I have to believe they wouldn't make it impossible. The activation was scheduled for the next day at 1,400 hours. The entire crew gathered, some on the ship, others in the access corridor with Daejung. Coalition High Command was observing via live feed. The pressure was suffocating. Daejung stood before the control panel. He'd identified 7 mechanical safeties that needed to be unlocked first. Then, 3 dial systems that needed to be aligned. Finally, a master switch. Ready when you are, Captain Lias said from the ship. Daejung reached for the first safety lock. It was a physical mechanism, beautifully engineered. When he turned it, it clicked open with satisfying precision. The sound echoed through the corridor. One by one, he unlocked all 7 safeties. Each one clicked open perfectly, like they'd been waiting for this moment. Machinery built to last. Built to be used. Next came the dials. They were covered in geometric symbols that he'd studied for hours. The pattern suggested they needed to be aligned to create a continuous design. He rotated the first dial slowly, feeling it click into positions. When the symbols aligned properly, he felt a subtle vibration through the metal. First dial aligned, he reported. His hands were sweating inside his gloves. The second dial was trickier. It had more symbols, more positions. He rotated it carefully, watching how the patterns interacted with the first dial. There, that configuration created a symmetrical design. The vibration strengthened slightly. Second dial aligned. The third dial took the longest. He had to align it with both previous dials, creating a 3-dimensional pattern that only made sense when viewed from the correct angle. He adjusted it 12 times before he was satisfied. Third dial aligned. Now came the moment of truth. The master switch was a simple lever. worn smooth by hands that had vanished 15,000 years ago. How many Veltarans had stood where he stood now? How many had pulled this very lever? "All systems show ready," he said. His voice sounded calmer than he felt. "Engaging. Master. Switch in 3, 2, 1. He pulled the lever. For 30 seconds, nothing happened. Dae-jung felt his heart sink. He'd been wrong. All that confidence, all that risk. And he'd been. Deep inside the archive, something moved. It started as a vibration, then a hum, then a sound like ancient machinery waking from a long sleep. Lights flickered in the corridor, not the steady glow of coalition technology, but a warm, pulsing illumination that seemed almost alive. "We have power readings," someone shouted from the ship. Multiple systems activating across the archive. The geometric patterns on the walls began to glow. The light spread outward in waves, racing across the surface of the entire structure. Through the corridor windows, Dae-jung could see the archive coming to life like a city at dawn. The vibration grew stronger. More systems activated. Dae-jung could hear machinery moving, power flowing, computers waking up after 1,000 years of silence. And then, from speakers built into the walls, a voice spoke. It was in a language no one had heard in 15 millennia, but somehow, they all understood it. "Welcome," the archive said. "I have been waiting." The voice that came from the archive speakers was unlike anything Dae-jung had heard before. It wasn't mechanical, but it wasn't quite organic either. It existed somewhere in between, warm and ancient, and patient. "I am the custodian," the voice said. The words appeared in everyone's mind, more than their ears. "I have maintained this archive for 1,047 years, 3 months, and 16 days. I have waited for someone to remember how to open the door." Dr. Hyune moved forward, her translator device working frantically to process the language. "Custodian. I am Dr. Hyune of Earth. We represent the Galactic Coalition. Can you tell us what happened to the Veltarans?" Silence. Then, "The Veltarans transcended physical form 12,342 years ago. They uploaded their consciousness into a higher dimensional framework. This archive was their final gift to whatever species might follow." The implications of that statement rippled through the crew. 12,000 years. The Veltarans hadn't vanished suddenly. They'd left deliberately, transforming into something beyond physical existence. "Why did the archive go dark?" asked Captain Lees. "I entered emergency standby mode 1,000 years ago when the manual override was last accessed. The being who attempted activation did not complete the sequence correctly. I waited for the next attempt. I waited for someone who understood that sometimes the simplest solution is the correct one." Dae-jung felt dozens of eyes turn toward him. He'd activated 1,000-year-old machinery by following basic logic, by thinking like someone who actually built things instead of just studying them. "What is the purpose of this archive?" Dr. Yan asked. "To preserve, to teach, to warn." The custodian's voice carried weight. "The Veltarans left behind knowledge, technology, and history. They also left warnings about mistakes they made, threats they failed to stop, and wisdom they gained too late. All of it is available to you." The next 3 weeks transformed everything. The custodian opened sections of the archive, one by one, revealing wonders that made the Coalition's best technology look primitive. Medical bays contained healing devices that could cure diseases the Coalition had struggled with for centuries. Dae-jung watched as Hyune documented machines that could regrow limbs, reverse genetic damage, and extend lifespans far beyond what any species currently achieved. Engineering workshops held blueprints for ships that could cross entire galaxies in weeks instead of years. Propulsion systems that folded space like paper. Power generators that drew energy from the fabric of reality itself. Technology that made Coalition engineering look like children playing with blocks. Cultural databases preserved the art, music, and philosophy of the Veltarans. But more than that, they preserved the cultures of 5 other civilizations that had thrived during the Veltaran era. Species long extinct now lived again in recordings and writings. And everywhere, woven through all the knowledge, were warnings. Dae-jung spent his time in the engineering sections, studying designs that hurt his brain to understand. The Veltarans built with such elegance that even their simplest machines operated on principles he could barely grasp. But one day, exploring a corridor that the custodian had just opened, he found something that gave him pause. A workshop, smaller than the others, filled with tools. Physical tools, wrenches and measurement devices and diagnostic equipment. Custodian, he asked out loud. Why would the Veltarans need physical tools if everything was automated? A wise question, engineer Dae-jung. The custodian's voice came from everywhere and nowhere. The Veltarans learned through 5 extinction-level catastrophes that complexity without simplicity is fragility. Every system, regardless of sophistication, must have a way to be restarted by someone with determination and basic tools. So the manual override wasn't a backup, it was a core feature. Correct. The Veltarans built wonders that operated on quantum principles and dimensional mathematics. But they ensured that if all else failed, someone with simple tools and the courage to try could wake their creations. Your species understands this instinctively. You still remember what it means to build with your hands. Word of the archive's activation spread across Coalition space at light speed. Within days, ships arrived from dozens of systems, all wanting to study what the humans had unlocked. Scientists, politicians, military observers, everyone wanted to see the Veltaran treasures. Dae-jung became famous overnight. The human who woke the archive. News services across the galaxy ran stories about the maintenance engineer who solved what the Coalition's greatest minds could not. Some praised his unconventional thinking. Others called it luck. Dr. Hyun's career transformed completely. Universities that had rejected her applications now begged her to join their faculties. She was offered positions as head of new research institutes dedicated to studying Veltaran culture. Her name would be in history books. But not everyone was happy. Councillor Veshnara, a politician from the Kravan Empire, gave a public statement that was broadcast across Coalition space. Let us not forget that this was pure fortune, not skill. The humans stumbled upon a solution through ignorance, not insight. This changes nothing about humanity's place in the Coalition. They are still a young species, barely ready to join galactic civilization. The statement sparked debates across 1,000 worlds. Some species agreed that humans had been lucky. Others pointed out that luck only worked when combined with courage to act. Dae-jung tried to ignore the attention. He spent his time learning from the archive, studying how the Veltarans combined advanced theory with practical design. Every machine had manual overrides. Every system had physical backups. Complexity and simplicity working together. One evening, Dr. Hyun found him in the engineering workshop, studying a Veltaran power regulator. You've been avoiding the celebrations, she said. I don't like crowds. You're a hero. The man who unlocked ancient secrets. I flipped a switch. Dae-jung set down the regulator. Anyone could have done it, if they'd looked, but they didn't look. They assumed it would be complicated because the Veltarans were advanced. You assumed it might be simple because systems need to be maintained. Hyun sat beside him. That's not luck. That's a different way of thinking. She pulled up a file on her datapad. I found something in the cultural database. Records about other species that joined the Galactic Coalition over the past 50,000 years. 7 civilizations that showed promise, that brought new ideas and innovations. What happened to them? They stagnated. Within a few generations, they stopped developing their own technology. They became dependent on coalition systems, coalition methods, coalition thinking. Her expression was troubled. The Veltarans had a term for it. They called it the shepherd's trap, which means what? That the coalition, despite good intentions, gradually domesticates new species. It values conformity and proven methods over risky innovation. Species that join eventually stop taking chances. They become safe, predictable, and ultimately, ordinary. 2. Daejung thought about that. About the cooling units on Kepler-9 that broke constantly because they were designed by committee, with every safety feature possible, but no consideration for actual maintenance. About the specialists who spent weeks building simulations instead of examining the actual machinery. The Veltarans left this archive as a warning, Hyunei continued. Not just about external threats, but about the danger of losing what makes a species special. They're telling us that humanity is at a crossroads. What kind of crossroads? Before she could answer, Captain Leas's voice came over the communication system. All senior staff to the briefing room. Coalition High Command has sent a priority message. The message was delivered by High Ambassador Tolvex, a Netheri who had served on the Coalition Council for 800 years. His form appeared as a hologram, shifting and ancient. On behalf of the Galactic Coalition, I congratulate you on this remarkable discovery. The archive represents a treasure trove of knowledge that will benefit all species. His form rippled with what might have been satisfaction. In recognition of this achievement, the Coalition is prepared to offer humanity a historic honor. He detailed the proposal. 3 seats on the Coalition Council, fast-tracked integration into Coalition society, access to advanced education and technology. 5. Everything humanity had dreamed of since first contact. But there was a condition, buried in the formal language of subsection 47, paragraph 3. All human engineering and scientific development would follow Coalition safety protocols. All human research would be supervised by Coalition oversight committees. All unsanctioned experimental methodology would be prohibited in any Coalition facility. Daejung felt something cold settle in his stomach. That means what you did here could never happen again, Dr. Yun said quietly. She looked troubled. No more trying unproven methods. No more taking risks without years of simulation. No more flipping switches to see what happens, Daejung added. Captain Leas read through the entire document carefully. They're offering us everything we've worked for. Respect. Equality. A place among the great civilizations. She looked up. And all we have to do is promise never to be unconventional again. The news reached Earth within hours. Humanity had been offered a place among the great civilizations of the galaxy. 3 seats on the Coalition Council. Full access to advanced technology. Everything they'd dreamed of since the day alien ships appeared in Earth's sky 30 years ago. Daejung watched the broadcasts from the archive. News channels showed celebrations in every major city. Politicians gave speeches about humanity's bright future. Children in schools learned that they would grow up as equals to species that had been traveling the stars for thousands of years. But he also saw the debates. Not everyone was celebrating. Dr. Kwanho, a professor at Seoul National University, appeared on a political discussion program. Read the fine print, he warned. This agreement requires us to abandon the very methods that got us here. We're being asked to trade our creativity for their approval. His opponent, Ambassador Tae-sung, dismissed the concern. We're a young species. We have everything to learn from the Coalition. Why would we cling to primitive methods when we can access technology that's been perfected over millennia? The argument played out across Earth. The integrationists, who believed humanity should embrace Coalition civilization fully. The independents, who worried that too much integration would cost humanity its identity. On the archive, the crew was divided too. Dr. Yun supported the agreement. This is what we've worked toward, she argued. Safety, stability, proven methods. Why would we reject that? Vector was less certain. I've watched Daejung work for months now. His methods seem reckless to me, but they produce results that our safe approaches don't. All 6 of his eyes focused on nothing in particular. Perhaps that recklessness has value. Dr. Hyun-A was firmly opposed. They're asking us to promise never to take chances again. Never to try the impossible. Never to flip a switch just to see what happens. She looked at Dae-jung. How many problems would still be problems if everyone thought that way? Captain Leas called a final crew meeting. Coalition High Command wants our recommendation. The human government is waiting to hear from the people who actually activated the archive. What should I tell them? 1. The room fell silent. Dae-jung felt everyone's eyes turn to him. He wasn't a politician or a scholar. He was just an engineer who'd gotten lucky. What did his opinion matter? But then he thought about the cooling units on Kepler 9, about specialists who studied problems instead of solving them. About the 1,000 years, the archive sat dark because no one thought to look for a simple solution. May I tell a story? He asked. Captain Leas nodded. When I was 7, my grandfather's farm equipment broke during harvest season. A machine that planted rice. The manufacturer said they'd send a replacement part in 6 weeks. We couldn't wait 6 weeks. The harvest would be lost. Dae-jung stood up. My grandfather barely finished school. He didn't understand engineering or physics, or any of the theory behind how the machine worked. But he took it apart, found the broken component, and rebuilt it using scrap metal and a welding torch. The repair wasn't elegant. It probably violated every safety code. But it worked. It saved our farm. He looked around the room. The coalition is offering us amazing things. Their technology, their knowledge, their civilization, and they're right that we have a lot to learn. But they're also asking us to promise that we'll never again be the person who rebuilds a component with scrap metal and a welding torch. They want us to always wait for the proper replacement part, even if the harvest is rotting in the field. Safety protocols exist for good reasons, Dr. Yun said gently. They do, Dae-jung agreed. But so does the willingness to try things that might not work. The Veltarans built the most advanced civilization in galactic history, and they included manual overrides in everything. They understood that sometimes the complicated solution isn't the right one. Sometimes you just need to flip the switch and see what happens. Ambassador Tolvex's hologram appeared again 3 days later. The coalition wanted an answer. Would humanity accept their generous offer? The human government had decided to let the archive crew make the recommendation. They were the ones who'd proven humanity's worth. Their opinion would carry weight. Captain Leas delivered the response with her characteristic calm. The coalition's offer is generous and appreciated. Humanity is honored by your recognition. However, we would like to propose an alternative arrangement. Tolvex's form rippled with surprise. Alternative? Humanity will accept coalition membership with the standard rights and responsibilities, but we request permission to establish what we call innovation zones facilities, where humans can experiment with unconventional approaches to engineering and problem solving. The results of successful experiments would be shared with the coalition. The failures would be ours alone to bear. You're asking for permission to ignore safety protocols? We're asking for permission to develop new safety protocols, to find solutions that haven't been tried before, to occasionally flip switches just to see what happens. Lisa's crystalline face reflected the hologram's light. The archive sat dormant for 1,000 years because everyone assumed the solution would be complicated. We woke it by trying something simple. Perhaps that perspective has value. The debate that followed lasted 3 months. Coalition council members argued passionately on both sides. Some species saw innovation zones as dangerous. Others, remembering their own early years in the coalition, supported humanity's request. Dr. Yun surprised everyone by supporting the proposal. I've spent 2 centuries following proper procedures, she said in her testimony to the council. In that time, I've built remarkable things. But I've never woken something that slept for a millennium. Perhaps there's wisdom in occasionally setting aside the rule book. The vote was close, but it passed. humanity joined the Galactic Coalition with full membership and the right to maintain innovation zones. Facilities where human engineers could experiment, take risks, and occasionally flip switches without permission. 5 years later, Daejung stood in Innovation Zone 7, a massive station orbiting a moon at the edge of Coalition space. Around him worked hundreds of engineers, mostly human, but with a growing number of aliens who'd grown frustrated with Coalition orthodoxy. They were building things the Coalition insisted were impossible. Ships that combined Veltaran principles with human improvisation. Medical devices that adapted on the fly to each patient. Power systems that learned and evolved instead of following fixed programming. Not everything worked. They had a wall dedicated to spectacular failures, experiments that exploded, collapsed, or simply refused to function. But they also had a wall of successes, innovations that were slowly spreading across Coalition space, making life better for billions of beings. Dr. Hyune visited regularly. She now ran the Veltaran Studies Institute, the premier research facility for ancient civilizations. "They're calling us the troublemakers," she told Daejung during her latest visit. "Good," he replied, watching a prototype vessel flicker into existence using a drive system they'd invented 4 months ago. The galaxy could use more trouble. Well, a young human engineer approached, looking nervous. Her name was Ji-won. Fresh from university and eager to prove herself. "Sir, we're ready to test the quantum relay. But the simulations show a 30% chance of catastrophic failure." Daejung smiled. "And what do your instincts say?" "That it'll work. The math is solid, even if the computers don't believe it yet. Then test it. But do it safely, evacuate the test chamber, and have emergency systems ready." Ji-won grinned and hurried off. Hyun-A watched her go. "You're teaching a new generation to take risks. I'm teaching them to trust themselves, to try things that might not work, to understand that sometimes the best solution is the one that makes the computers nervous." Daejung turned back to his own work. "The Coalition is incredible, but it became incredible because species were willing to try impossible things. We're just reminding them of that." On the wall of Innovation Zone 7, someone had mounted a small memorial. A physical switch, simple and mechanical, attached to a brass plaque. The inscription was written in dozens of languages. When they said it hadn't worked in 1,000 years, we said, "Attempt it." Below that, in smaller letters, "The Veltarans left us knowledge. But more importantly, they left us a lesson. Advanced civilizations need both complexity and simplicity, both theory and practice, both caution and courage. Never forget that sometimes the solution is as simple as flipping a switch." Daejung touched the memorial as he passed it. A ritual he performed every day. The metal was warm under his fingers, warmed by the touch of hundreds of engineers who'd done the same. Humanity had joined the Galactic Coalition, but they'd done it on their own terms, bringing with them something the galaxy had been missing, a willingness to attempt the impossible, to try what others said wouldn't work, to flip the switch even when the odds seemed bad. The cooling unit on Innovation Zone 7 broke 3 times in the first year. Each time, Daejung fixed it using methods that made the Coalition engineers wince. But it worked, and in the end, that was all that mattered. In the distance, a new vessel was taking shape. It combined technology from 5 different species, using principles that shouldn't work together according to conventional wisdom. The computers predicted failure. The equations showed impossibility. But the human engineers building it had learned an important lesson. Sometimes, you ignore the predictions and attempt it anyway. Sometimes, that's exactly how miracles happen. And somewhere in the depths of space, in an archive that had waited 1,000 years for someone to open a door, the custodian watched humanity's progress with something that might have been approval. They'd learned the lesson the Veltarans had tried to teach. They'd understood that being advanced didn't mean abandoning the simple solutions. It meant knowing when to use them. The galaxy was changing. Slowly, carefully, but changing. and it started with one human engineer who'd looked at an ancient machine and thought, maybe the answer is simpler than everyone thinks. Maybe all it needs is for someone to flip the switch and say, attempt it.